Hello and welcome to the Get Lit Festival. I'm Kate Peterson, Director of Get Lit Programs, a nonprofit housed within Eastern Washington University. Get Lit is a week-long celebration of literature traditionally held in Spokane, Washington. This year, all of our events are virtual. Almost all of them are completely free of charge and will remain available to view for a full year on our website and on our YouTube channel. To learn more about Get Lit, to find this year's schedule, or to donate to help support our program, please click on the link below to visit our website, getlitfestival.org. Now I'd like to hand it off to Claire Walla, Get Lit's Assistant Coordinator.
Thanks, Kate, and thank you all for joining us for a reading to celebrate the talents of Kate Lebo, Kathryn Nuernberger, and CMarie Fuhrman. This event will be hosted by Maya Jewel Zeller, but before Maya takes over, I'd like to give her a short introduction. Maya Jewel Zeller is the author of Alchemy for Cells and Other Beasts, an interdisciplinary collaboration with Seattle-based artist Carrie DeBacker, as well as the chapbook Yesterday the Bees and the poetry collection Rust Fish. Her prose appears in such places as Brevity, Bellingham Review, and Booth Journal, and she's been the recipient of a Promise Award from the Sustainable Arts Foundation, as well as a residency with the H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest. She is currently at work on a memoir called Raised by Ferns. Welcome, Maya.
Thanks, Claire, and thanks, Kate, and all the Get Lit staff and volunteers for your work and for hosting us today. It's an honor to moderate this reading and conversation, Difficult Fruits. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all the lands we're on today. While we meet on a virtual platform, we still seek to highlight the importance of these lands we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. I, Maya, am currently on Yakama Nation land, a place of magpies and killdeer, cheatgrass and sage, as well as peoples past and now. Please join me in a moment of reflection to consider how we can each, in our own ways, educate ourselves about the past and try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Thank you. The three authors you are about to hear, each coming to us from different places today, are mulchers and harvesters, researchers and listeners. They tell us unexpected stories from the earth and its creatures. As Kate Lebo wrote in our recent email exchange, all of us interrupt usual narratives about how humans intersect and interact with plant and animal life. For Kate, this interaction includes human lives, as in her apprenticeship to a cheesemaker. It also includes long hours at the library, pouring through text to find overt connections between her subjects, in one case, the juniper and women's reproductive rights. For CMarie Fuhrman, interaction means daily excursions into the woods with her dogs and sometimes her gun. And her work sets its own terms, demythologizing the West. In Coyote Story, she tells us that being human in the West, in the moderately wild places I live, is a threat, no matter how kindly and carefully I walk. And like CMarie, Kathryn Nuernberger isn't interested in offering us a romanticized version of history, others or her own. And even if every time she relocates, she thinks she'll write the field guide to the beautiful weeds on the new acreage, she often finds herself ripping out the harebell and anemone by the roots, her face strewn with a rash from surprise poison ivy. All three of these writers, themselves complex, nuanced human animals, intersect in their lives and writing with the fruits of this beautiful world. But those fruits are not always easy. Welcome to our reading, Difficult Fruits. Before each author reads, I will introduce her individually. Our first is CMarie. CMarie Fuhrman is the author of Camped Beneath the Dam, poems, and co-editor of Native Voices. She has published poetry and nonfiction in multiple journals, including Emergence Magazine, Yellow Medicine Review, Cutthroat, Whitefish Review, Broadsided Press, and several anthologies. CMarie is a regular columnist for The Inlander, the translations editor for Broadsided Press, nonfiction editor for High Desert Journal, and director of the Elk River Writers Conference. She resides in the mountains of West Central Idaho. Please help me welcome CMarie Fuhrman.
Every single time, a year, and I still leave myself on mute. Thank you so much. for inviting me and for your friendship, Kate, and now Kate and Kate, and let me be a part of this beautiful reading. And thank you, Maya, for that wonderful introduction, for the acknowledgement, and for reminding everyone that these lands are not only stolen, but the people were stolen from them. So I'm going to start with a reading of Coyote's story. Autumn, Beartooth's front country. The sky and landscape are buckskin and blue. I am driving my Ford pickup down the roads that encircle the ranch I am living on, caretaking. The little other work than keeping a fire going and feeding the owner's horses is required of me. I am an hour from the nearest town of mention. From almost anywhere on the ranch, I see no neighbors. I am out driving just to be out, to be looking across the vast distances that have always filled me. This is a land devoid of structures, of obvious human intervention. Here I can imagine, I can dream without intrusion of even a fence line, and those dreams are never lonesome things. They are filled with stories, memory, the call of meadowlark, the huff of a doe muley, the song of coyotes. All my insides find home here and resonate back to me in the enormity of a southern Montana prairie. I come up over a small rise, and in the distance I see something jump. Once, then again, an awkward jump, almost sideways, almost a pounce. At first, I think I am seeing a rabbit, perhaps a fox, but the color is wrong, the size. I press the brake and reach for my binoculars, bring them to my eyes. As I turn the thumb wheel, a brown coyote comes into focus. It throws its head back as if tugging, pulling against some force that holds it in place, yet I cannot see what. I lift my foot from the brake and roll forward. I don't know when I realized the coyote's left ankle is caught between two horseshoe-shaped jaws of a dull silver trap. I walk from the truck to the coyote. Each step in the reddish-brown soil raises puffs of dirt around my feet. As I grow near, I see how fragile the coyote is, thin, how like my dog Katie's are its amber eyes. Then I see the blood in the soil, the swelling and rawness of the ankle chewed. The coyote had dug at the trap with its free paw, its mouth a mud of blood and froth. As I draw closer, the coyote begins to growl, to bare its teeth. I walk a circle around the animal. I look for ways to spring the trap, but traps such as these are not something with which I am familiar. My breath and words stick when I talk to the coyote, only platitudes escape. I look toward the passenger window of my blue truck. From inside, my dog Katie is looking out at me, her eyes begging the question, what are you going to do? One dog in my truck who needs my protection, and one at my feet who inherently knows I am not to be trusted. The sky on that day was the color of the paper on which I write this story. Not white, not gray, caught in the middle somewhere. The color of possibility here, but not when enshrouding the gruesome scene unfolding on the prairie. The sky that day held certainties. The story for the coyote could have only one ending. Winter was coming, there was no doubt about that. The clouds spit and its drops were cold and sharp against my face. I keep recalling that day. I keep coming back to the coyote story, not because I think I could have done anything different. The fate of the coyote was set in motion when the first white people came west, and it was handed down through the men in the mist that made the man from the town of Bridger, who set the trap on that barren hillside, placed a bit of ground beef around it, and yawned that metal mouth open. I would never meet that man, but he would find my reply to the question of his fate. He would, in the prints I left in the dirt, in the metal I destroyed with a maul, know my anger. Yet I was the one guilty of trespass. The law protected his right to trap, to mangle the leg of a coyote, to let it suffer, bleed, and starve for hours, days. My only witness was the prairie. I keep coming back to the coyote story because I forget how it ends for me. There are so many possibilities, but writing it here will set us both straight. And I keep coming back to the coyote because I work in metaphor, symbol. I see patterns, I find story. The first story is of the coyote in me. The next belongs to those I called in hope that we might save the coyote. The county vet, who would later corner me in my barn when he came over to float my mare's teeth, denied me any help. My friend Ron from 1,000 miles away assured me there was nothing else I could do. The third story died with my dog Katie, who I am certain is composed of nothing but story. She watched intently that day through the closed window. I do not pretend to know how she translated what she saw, but I am certain that when I got back in the truck, the cursory sniff she gave was not so she could catch a scent of her wild cousin, but to be certain it was I who sat beside her and drove us back to the house. I left the coyote as I found it and put Katie in my bedroom. I cannot bear for her to witness what happened next. Writing teachers have encouraged me not to anthropomorphize nature, while my elders tell me that we, nature and I, are the same. I tend to write on the side of the elders. I believe that trees exhibit emotion, and I am haunted by a young doe, whether sister or mate, who walked around the corpse of a newly shot buck, unable to leave his side out of a devotion I fully understand. And the buck's meat wasn't filled with the bitter taste of regret, but filled me with a desire to live a life worthy of its wild sustenance. Yet another story, a metaphor, a reminder of how, for an hour after my husband had drowned, I lay beside him, holding him, unwilling to let his body be taken from me, to be carried off not for sustenance, but autopsy, cremation. We die so many times in one life. A certain sky that day too. I did not anthropomorphize the river that carried his last breath away with so much spring runoff. I did not hope that it would somehow consider me and my pain as it did. Though now that I am older, now that I have known 20 more years of rivers, I might tell you they are the most abiding, always returning what they take. Somewhere off the Gulf where the spring runoff finally met the sea, I believe I retrieved my husband's breaths and made them mine. Older now, 20 or more years, I come back to the coyote story, and I have known some coyotes since, both those taught to me in traditional stories and those who met me in the wild rearing dens of pups a 15-minute walk from where I now live. Katie was old when she met those coyote parents. We were jogging. They came out from the brush and ran alongside us. It all happened so quickly that I still don't know if it was providence or omen. They did not try to bite either of my dogs. They only paralleled us in the brush and barked as if ushering us off. They were protecting their kin. We had trespassed. The dogs, I will not say, dwelled on that, but I did. Being human in the West, in the moderately wild places I live in, is a threat, no matter how kindly and carefully I walk. The deer will tell you that. The coyote. In the spring, when I am hiking and not hunting, I tell the animals who stop to gaze at me as I gaze back in adoration that I am not to be trusted. I am two people. I will be seeking a different sustenance in a few months. I try to live in a way so as to deserve that. Along the Salmon River in spring, in a place where the previous fall I had hunted deer, I once met a young buck and doe. As if I were joking, for I thought I was, I told my partner to stop the truck and ready the camera. I was going to get out and pet them. I stepped out of the truck and walked up to the pair. In no time, I was scratching them behind the ears, and they were gently nudging me with their heads, trying to play. The picture my partner took shows an undeniable happiness, joy, my arm around the buck, the doe with her nose to my cheek. Would the deer, anthropomorphized, title this picture Forgiven? My practice of hunting has not changed, nor that of praying that the meat I take is ingested by someone who lives a life well enough to deserve it. But who's to judge guilt or innocence? I contain multitudes, Whitman writes. I have known other coyotes as well, albeit from a distance, along roadsides, through scat, at night and song, and this winter, on the eve of my 48th birthday, from a rock above the San Juan River near Bluff, Utah. To my right, hundreds of paintings and peckings left by thousands of years of visitors to this place. To my left, Navajo land. It was late December, but the sun was strong, and we, lizard-like, stretched out on the warm rocks and watched as the water rolled by like hammered silver. First, a foursome of ducks came floating along the current. When they were startled, splashed, and flew off downriver, we spotted the source of their fear, a coyote wandering out of the thick invasive tamarisk. And then another. And behind them, a mostly black Angus ambled out, a yellow tag punched in its left ear. They all walked to the edge of the San Juan and drank together. My dogs watched intently, quietly, The coyotes did not notice us, or if they did, they didn't care. They had the river on their side. I raised my camera and took a picture of the threesome, and then, as if called, all three turned and walked back into that dense brush. The picture, no matter how you look at it, shows three coyotes. Traditional stories about coyote are about a trickster, mocking stories, moral stories, coyote made human, anthropomorphic. In other stories, coyote is a protector, his antics a way to keep the other animals safe. We don't tell coyote stories in the summer, so I will not go on. But you should know that, at least in my grandmother's stories, magic surrounds coyote. Is there a reverse process for anthropomorphizing? Do animals give animal traits to humans in an effort to live better, to understand us? Would the coyotes on the riverbank tell stories about the humans lounging on the rock? What would the moral or lesson be? Would the coyote see the two people in me? My elders would say that coyote and human are one, the same. I think often about the two people I am. Is that all of me there is? Can I discern one from the other, or have I gotten too close? A friend once asked how it was that I pulled the silver trigger of my 30-06 when it was pointed at the right shoulder of a cow elk on an early winter slope. Something else took over, I told her. I had clicked the safety off and then back on a dozen or more times. My finger moved as delicately past the trigger guard as it does when tracing the bone of my lover's jaw. I am two people. The other one pulled the trigger. The one who writes on this sky the color of month-old snow pushes the U key on this keyboard with her trigger finger, draws it to my lips to say shh when the dogs bark at the sight of a bear and her cubs. Maybe within me are two survivors, one that kills and one that cleans up. There is a metaphor for my life in the river story, the one about the coyote and the cow. It is about my biological parents, one native, one European, Italian. This is the story I was told, the story of me. I am of two people, colonized and colonizer. I am of two continents, maybe more. When do I bring them together? The story of the coyote and the trap is one I come back to as I write about Native women. How the law protected the trapper, allows suffering, the removal of pests. Not more than an hour's walk from where the coyote was trapped is the Crow Reservation, a wild horse refuge. Everywhere there is story, ice caves. Native women have been disappearing by the thousands. There is no record of this in federal courts or by police authorities off the reservation. The highest number of disappearing women occurs near man camps, those temporary lodgings set up for oil field workers in places such as Williston, North Dakota, under white skies. The county vet would back me into a corner in the barn and say, now that my husband was dead, he could help me, could take care of me. I hid in the basement when he came to my house, my right finger to my lips, asking the dogs to shh. My grandmother prays for all our relations. Is mine the narrative of the West? In this story, I am Crazy Horse, and others I am Columbus. Which one, my friend asked me, pulls the trigger? How do you know who to trust? I keep coming back to the coyote story because I shot the coyote twice. The first time I tried, I stepped out of my truck with a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson handgun in my right hand. I carried it against the flesh of my right thigh. When I got close to the coyote and the coyote paused, I raised the gun. I'm trained in firearms, captain of the pistol team in college. I am made of two countries, one colonized and one colonizer. I don't know which one brought the gun I raised. I was close enough not to need to look through the sights. I cupped my left hand under my right, pointed it at the dog, for that's what it is in the end, dog. My Katie was in the truck behind me, watching. I've known no truer friend. Older now, I come back to the coyote story. I have killed deer and elk since then. I write about the Native experience, about Native women's bodies. I went to a college built on Nez Perce lands and colonial ideals. I bonded with white mentors and argued with white men who told me the land is not stolen, that the Indian was conquered. I am called squaw by those who think that the word can control me. I am asked if I am Mexican or once Greek. What is your bloodline? I was asked once, as if a horse. We are the animals, my elders say. We are many people in one. It was a dog. You should not anthropomorphize. Joe kept telling me with my poems, don't tell. I am telling you the story of the woman who shot the coyote twice. I could not kill it, you see, not with the pistol. My right hand started to tremble, eyes amber like my Katie's. I drove the miles back to the ranch house and left Katie inside my room and took my 30-06 from the wall, the 30-06 I would use years later to kill the cow elk, the same rifle I bought from my late husband the Christmas before he died. I drove the bumpy road back past the place where I first saw the animal. And today, I parked 20 yards from the car and cut the engine. I never closed the door after I got out. I just lay my breast against the warm of the hood and placed the coyote's head in the fine crosshairs of my rifle. My finger slid past the trigger guard to the trigger and I pulled it. Something else took over. But my shot was hasty and ill-placed and hit the coyote in the back end, blowing apart its hind leg and rendering it motionless, but alive. I keep coming back to the coyote story to try to find out who it was that tossed the rifle back into the pickup and pulled out the pistol, crossed the short distance between us, laid the muzzle of the 40 to the soft spot of hair beneath the coyote's left ear, and pulled the trigger. I am two people, one who kills, one who cleans up. Perhaps there are more, countless others. Like the river that carried my husband's breath back to me, it also carried the breaths of all the lives it's claimed. We are in and of the world, the elders tell me. I contain multitudes. I drank the river that came from my husband's mouth and carried it on my hands, the blood of coyote and elk. I can smell the breath still of the county vet and Katie's paws after she ran in grass. Every death is a loss and every memory of birth. How many times can we die in one life and still breathe? I come back to the coyote story as a metaphor for the West. I come back to the story of the coyote for the story of myself. Sometimes I am the one in the trap, unable to chew off my leg, unwilling to simply die. Sometimes I place the bait. Both metaphors are mine. If coyote or anything, they are survivors. We are one, the elders sing. I keep coming back to the coyote story to try to remember the moments after killing the coyote with exact clarity. I must get it right. Sometimes I see it as if I'm watching myself from a distance with the coyote's eyes, through Katie, from behind the safety of binoculars and windshield and scope. I couldn't shoot the coyote with my pistol because something in its eyes, amber like Katie's, reminded me of a familiar desperation. From a distance, I couldn't see that until I had to. The muzzle on the soft spot below the ear, the temple, so much like our own. I come back to the story because I still don't know who I killed that day in the Beartooth Front Country. I don't know if mine was an act of benevolence or mercy. I've never returned to that place, not physically, where I killed the coyote. It is lost on the prairie, but perfectly mapped on the landscape of my memory. I sold the old blue Ford. Katie is dead and buried in the woods beyond my house. 2 new dogs are in my life. Another man. The county vet, I am told, ran off with someone else's wife. But that doesn't mean he doesn't haunt me, or that I don't harbor the ghost of the coyote. But now all the stories are mine, and in this one, the coyote dies. There was no other way for it to end. Its fragile leg is the leg broken in the trap, pinned to the earth on a small rise in south central Montana. A person in a blue truck pulls up, and the coyote, who knows nothing of mercy, is right to be afraid of this two-legged. The coyote feels more pain before its final release, staring into the green eyes of its destroyer as it dies. The coyote does not anthropomorphize. It knows me only as predator, sees me only as human. In another version of the same story, the coyote lives, though the teller has to imagine the animal free, even if she is no less dead. The woman gets back in the truck, the broken body of a dog, for that's all it really is, isn't it? Lying on the seat beside her. She strokes its fur as she drives, sings the songs her grandmother taught her, and where she finally buries it becomes story. Thank you.
Thank you, CMarie. No matter how many times I hear that, every time I get the feels. Thank you so much. Kate Lebo's first collection of nonfiction, The Book of Difficult Fruit, will be published by FSG in April of 2021. Her previous books include the cookbook Pie School, the poetry chapbook 7 Prayers to Kathy McMorris Rogers, and the anthology Pie and Whiskey, Writers Under the Influence of Butter and Booze, which she edited with Samuel Licken. Her essay about listening through hearing loss, The Loud Proof Room, originally published in New England Review, was anthologized in Best American Essays 2015. She lives in Spokane, where she is an apprentice cheesemaker to Laura Lee Misterly of Quillalascut Farm. Please welcome Kate Lebo.
Thank you so much, Maya. Thank you, Cindy. That essay blows me away every time. And it was wonderful to get to hear it in your voice. All three of you are writers who teach me what's possible in the essay form. And I'm so happy to be with you today to share this book. This is actually the very first reading I've done from the book of Difficult Fruit. This is an advanced reader's copy. I don't even have a copy of my own book yet. I'm going to read the very first chapter. It's called Aronia. So the Book of Difficult Fruit is an A to Z of essays that use unusual or unruly fruit to tell stories where what nurtures us and what harms us are entangled. So you'll get a taste of what that means with Aronia. Aronia berries taste vegetal, like a grass stem, then sour like a crab apple, with a tannic pucker that rivals raw quince and deep purple juice that stains teeth like wine. Aronia's folk name, in many places still the name they're best known by, is black chokeberry, earned by what you do when you eat them. Member of the rose family and native to the eastern half of the United States and Canada, Aronia grows wild in good or poor soil, in meadows or bogs or roadsides or the edges of oceans and lakes, a cold climate bush that loves full sun. It has been farmed in Eastern Europe and Russia for winemaking, food coloring, and dessert flavoring since the mid-20th century, but only recently have American consumers shown any interest. Today, the co-ops and health food stores where Aronia might be found usually sell it as superfruit, nature's medicine, chewable by the handful if you can stand the taste. Aronia berries are high in polyphenols, the phytochemicals with antioxidant properties advertised to prevent cancer and banish wrinkles, allowing us to imagine an invisible serum that can slake, slough, or soothe the rust from our oxidizing, time-sensitive bodies. Anthocyanins give the berries their deep color and antioxidant load, while tannins contribute a dry, overpowering taste so strong that most people cut Aronia berries with milder fruit to choke them down. Tannins often accompany anthocyanins, which means darker fruit tends to be more astringent. To get the most nutritional benefit, take Aronia straight. The operative rule here, as it was in my childhood home, is the worse it tastes, the healthier it must be. My mother's best scheme to convert me to her health rituals is a fruit smoothie. She starts with leafy greens in a blender, pours hot ginger tea over the greens to cook them slightly, then adds blueberries, 2 tablespoons of ground flax, and a banana, and blends until liquefied. The blender we use to make this drink shares the name of the hope we place in drinking it, magic bullet, or something that cures or remedies without harmful side effects. I often confuse magic bullets with silver ones, which do something else, kill mercurial monsters efficiently. Lately, I've replaced the blueberries in my mother's recipe with Aronia berries. I would believe they are 3 to 4 times healthier than blues, even if their packaging didn't say so, because they immediately assert their potency. They stain everything they touch with a deep purple that's not like blood, but reminds me of it. When I smash an Aronia berry between my thumb and the kitchen counter, I make ink that doubles as a nutritional supplement. My husband, Sam, tastes my Aronia smoothie and grimaces. He wants to know what happened to my smoothie skills. You get used to the taste, I say. You start to like it. I don't believe Aronia berries will keep my cells unoxidized and disease-free, but I do believe that by preparing and ingesting these so-called superfruits and willing myself to complete this ritual every day, I have created conditions for good health. When I catch a cold or when my immune system begins to attack me, it won't be because I have abused my body, but because I have one. Every morning, I drink an Aronia smoothie and gather my pills. 1 Tic Tac size generic for allergies. 2 cellulose sacks, clear so I can see the beige vitamin powder inside. Tablets of green tea extract to clear my head and tryptophan to calm my inner weather. 1 gigantic blue-black pill, magnesium for smooth digestion, and 1 average-sized green, nettles to curb histamine. 2 mustard-hued turmeric prophylactics that might reduce inflammation and might do nothing at all, but have no side effects, so why not? Finally, 4 brick red pills, mesalamine, to forestall a range of symptoms from ulcerative colitis, an autoimmune disease whose treatment and only cure includes removing the colon. When my depression or allergies or inflammation returns, I will, through this ritual, relieve myself of responsibility. I did everything I could, I'll say, all I can do. Lately, my medicines are working. My compliance, as doctors might describe my willingness to follow this smoothie and pill routine, has been 100%. Lately, I feel just fine. When I feel well, on days when my body's only flaws are the ones dreamed up by my vanity, these pills seem worth the chore of swallowing them, the gagging, and the money. When I don't feel well, I can blame my lack of compliance. Current evidence-based medical advice says antioxidants like those found in Aronia berries might improve health when ingested as a naturally occurring element of a balanced diet. Even then, the fruits and vegetables themselves may deserve the credit, or the benefits associated with antioxidants might be accessible only in concert with other natural elements in fruits and veggies. Supplements that isolate and concentrate particular antioxidants as if they are pure ore extracted from the waste rock of fruit have no proven benefits and may even harm. What we know for certain is what we've known for ages. A diet high in fruits and vegetables is healthier than a diet that isn't. The faith my mother gave me in food as medicine is well placed, but when it comes to superfruits, we should all remain agnostic. An alternative guide to food as medicine, one that lingers in our collective imagination despite a slew of evidence that contradicts its advice, is the doctrine of signatures. This ancient method of identifying the medicinal properties of the vegetable kingdom observes a plant's shape, color, odor, or habitat and relates these characteristics to the human body parts and conditions we imagine these plants resemble. Lungwort's mottled leaves look like sick lungs, which signals that it aids respiratory diseases. Eyebright's white-lashed flowers indicate that the plant will help sight. Stinging nettles echo the sting of allergies, so we use them to reduce our histamine response. Eat carrots to see in the dark. Eat bread crusts to make hair curl. In Christian cultures, God formed these signatures to help people identify how to heal themselves. But the doctrine of signatures appears with or without that ideology and with or without that name all over the world throughout human history, from ancient Rome to English herbalists of the Middle Ages, from Renaissance physicians to modern day Israeli folk medicine, from Native American medicinal traditions to ancient and modern Chinese medicine. This relation between plant and human parts is underpinned by a shared understanding between healer and patient that the human body doesn't end at our skins, but extends into nature, that what is in nature is also in us. It is not so much a list of prescriptions as a way of seeing and making sense of how a world that harms our bodies can also heal them. To many people today, and plenty in past eras, the doctrine of signatures is laughable, mere pseudoscience. And yet, I haven't stopped believing my eyes. The resemblance between small, round Aronia berries and pills, between dark purple Aronia juice and lifeblood, they make sense. A visual rhyme that reinforces my faith in Aronia's hidden attributes. A way to look for a cure when I don't know how to cure myself. I know these berries aren't magic. I know they aren't medicine, but I feel better. Superfruits might be sold for their medicinal characteristics. Their high-density nutrients may promote good health and longevity, and their righteous glow has certainly been documented by advertising. But superfruit is a marketing pitch, not a medical term. Truly medical food, as the FDA defines it, is food that has been processed and formulated to treat a particular ailment, like malnutrition, and is administered under medical supervision. Medical food is not your doctor's advice to eat a balanced diet or consume superfruits to manage particular symptoms. We eat superfruits anyway. Some of them are even tasty. But why do health-focused Americans eat acai and goji berries from abroad instead of Aronia from our own backyard? Exoticism sells. Plus, chokeberry is bad branding. Not only is the name unappetizing, but chokeberry is a common plant, unremarkable in appearance and seemingly useless as food. The Potawatomi tribes of the Great Lakes have long known chokeberry's medicinal properties. In Native American medicinal plants, Daniel E. Moorman documents their use of chokeberry infusions for colds. But that knowledge wasn't valued by immigrant colonizers as they spread across the Midwest, and it wasn't passed down in any mainstream way to their descendants. Only recently have commercial marketers replaced the choke in favor of the more alluring Aronia from the plant's scientific name, Aronia melanocarpa. And only after Aronia berry replaced chokeberry did marketers find eager North American customers. Though Aronia berries are called barren berries and choke pears, they are not choke cherries, a prunus species with dark fruits that look like chokeberries but have pits like cherries. It is possible to confuse the two. They share the astringency and antioxidant load that gives both species their choke. But whereas the entire chokeberry plant can be consumed without consequence, parts of the choke cherry plant are poisonous. Do not eat choke cherry leaves or seeds. They contain compounds that the body turns into cyanide. What I remember most about my mother's illnesses, whose symptoms were largely invisible because they came from migraines, just another tired mom, as one doctor diagnosed, are her diets, which hovered at the edge of our supper time routines. Sardines, broccoli, fiber, flax. We did not have to eat those things, but we watched her eat those things, taking them into her body like a cure. And my favorite childhood memory is 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, the year I've learned how to read. I am sitting on the floor with a stack of Sears catalogs in my lap, sealed in a quiet that's like the quiet I feel right now, writing this. I am reading, that's all. When, as an adult, I first told my mother about this, she cried. She cried because she was not there. She was not there because by the time she was 30, the migraines that had felled her occasionally since childhood began to strike her down every week. I remember her home from work at the clinic, her bedroom curtains pulled against the sun, an ice pick clouding her forehead and eyes, the nausea and pain larger than she could support and stay upright. I remember a tunnel of bedclothes with my mother inside, still and quiet and breathing, waiting to be released. My father was also not there. He was at a construction site. He's never said he feels sorry for this. Why should he? He would have felt guilty for not working. My mother is sorry. My mother is sad because every hour she retreated from us in pain is an hour stolen from her. She is still totaling that theft. I tell her I was happy alone. Her headaches gave me time to read and dream. This does not diminish her loss. Mom says, still, year after year, this is the year I will get my health under control. One of the main methods will be a strict diet of ever-changing eliminations. She just needs to be good. She just needs to be better. And she is good. She is better. And then she's not. Sometimes I think she's trying to cure herself with diets because diets are impossible to follow perfectly. So when she slips up, she can rest the blame for her illness on herself, not God, not science, compliance. The regimen that will restore her health, the argument she makes to a body that won't listen. Don't give her that, my mother scolds. This month she's vegetarian. My father has handed me the best bit of fat off the roast he just pulled from the grill. I put the meat in my mouth and chew, black sear on juicy fat and tender shreds of muscle, the best piece. He looks at Mom with a tight smile that says this is none of her business. That stuff is going to kill you, she says. I reach for another piece. I taunt her with my eating. I am not a child when this happens. I am 30, the age she was when migraines knocked her out. I feel a flash of fury like a child, though, because here again is the moving standard of health I cannot meet. I will not give up fatty roasted meats, but I do drink a smoothie every day. I make my smoothie nearly undrinkable with Aronia. Small purple seeds stud the inside of the blender. I imagine those pips in my digestive tract clinging to me. It is unpalatable to consider such things. How food is not just pleasure and nutrition and relief, but made of pieces that smear and stick to your insides, matter that your body has to work to expel. I'm describing this as if it were a problem, as if some perfect gruel exists that moves through you cleanly, politely, a Gwyneth Paltrow dream diet of ginger and air. There is such a diet. On a low residue diet, one must avoid any fruit with small seeds, especially berries, peels, fiber-rich substances, dairy, grain, and meat. It is a diet for when even homeopathic cures that are unproved to help, but certain not to hurt, except my wallet, aren't helping. This diet provides the righteous difficulty of a cleanse while treating your insides like a toothless convalescent. Congee, boiled carrots, baked chicken. Gummy fuel for a gummed up machine. My GP is a naturopath, not an MD. She recommends a lot of supplements. I also see a more traditional nurse practitioner at my city's gastroenterology clinic. If you don't notice a difference within a week, my NP says, don't bother taking more. You'd be surprised how many of these natural treatments haven't passed clinical trials. My naturopath agrees, but her timeline is different. She'd like me to put faith in subtle and constant intervention. Try these homeopathic cures a little longer. Think of your immune response as a bucket, she says. The bucket can hold pretty much anything until it is full, and then it can't hold anything. Your sensitivity rises even to substances that didn't bother you before. When I take nettles or turmeric or avoid dairy, it's because we're trying to empty my bucket. It's also a matter of what you consider an acceptable amount of irritation, she says. One person's inflammatory response might be another person's no big deal. No amount of irritation is acceptable, my mother says when I tell her this. Pain is not normal. I can hear what she stopped herself from saying. Cut meat, dairy, sugar, add greens and berries. Make the right choices now so you don't end up like me. Sometimes, when I tell people about the physical therapy my mother does for a living, I tell them she's a good healer because she too is sick. She manipulates her patient's fascia and muscles, applies pressure in just such a way that they cease to hurt, then holds that position until she feels a pulse free itself and flood cramped tissue with oxygen, bringing it back into the circulatory system's usual route. This can seem as if, in the crowded room of your body, she's found your pain throbbing alone in a corner. She can do this because of science and study, but also because her pain-struck body knows, through long experience, how to see, where to touch, what to say. After my mother scolds us for eating meat, we eat as much as we usually would, but in defiance. My father grows heavy with it. We get used to eating separate meals at the same table or dining while mom sips water and says, it's fine, she already ate. We calm down, and the demands of her diet feel less painful and less dogmatic as they become routine. I still worry that refusing to eat the same food, even for the sake of her health, frays her bond with us, that her cure denies connection. During my latest autoimmune flare-up, a feeling of pressurized emptiness, like a bubble is blowing itself up in my stomach, then pain, like my guts are ripping open, I exile Aronia smoothies and all other fruits that can't be peeled and seeded. Gluten, whole grains, dairy, they all have to go. I do this to calm my system, but also to exhibit health-seeking behavior. So my doctors will believe in me. So my family will be patient with me. So I can say to myself, I did everything I could, all I can do. A month into this diet, my nurse practitioner tells me my hopes were misplaced. Boiled meals won't hurt, but they won't cure me either. My asceticism has been rewarded with stasis, not healing. This news is a relief and a disappointment, equally calibrated. Just, of course. Eat a balanced diet, take my medicine, call her if I have any problems. Today, I am in remission again, back on Aronia smoothies, and thinking of how the breakdown of our bodies can change the ways we are loved. I will never be completely healed, my doctor said. I should not hope for a cure, though I can hope, with medication and close attention to how food makes me feel, to feel healthy. My mother disagrees. For 35 years, she's pursued the cure for pain. Why would she be satisfied with stasis? I will figure this out, she says, for me, for herself. I am closer than ever, she says. I want to believe her. I want us to be well. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. That added so beautifully to CMarie's beginning to talk about what our bodies do and how we participate or how we reject the traditions we receive. And I'm really excited to put you both in conversation with each other shortly. We have one third reader, and that is Kathryn Nuernberger. Kathryn Nuernberger writes about the history of science and ideas, renegade women, plant medicines, and witches. Her latest book is The Witch of I, about witches and witch trials. She is also the author of Rue, poems about plants historically used for birth control. A graduate of the MFA program at Eastern Washington University, she teaches poetry and nonfiction for the MFA program at University of Minnesota. Please help me welcome Kathryn Nuernberger.
Thanks, Maya. Kate and Cindy, it's so exciting. I'm sorry, CMarie, it's so exciting to be reading with you. And thanks to everyone at Get Lit, especially Claire and Kate Peterson for putting this together. I'm going to read an essay from my book, The Witch of I. I picked it this morning. I was reading CMarie's, some of CMarie's work, and I was thinking about, I think it's called Lake 5, which was about coming upon a mountain lake where the amphibians had returned. And I thought this was, it made me think about experiences I've had with water. And I was also thinking about all the recipes in the book of difficult fruit that that end up being jellies that taste apparently very good with cheese. And so this essay ends with a spell for cheese. So anyway, so this is called The Long Lost Friend. A well-laid hex can last a long time. Powwows, or long lost friend, a collection of mysterious and invaluable arts and remedies for man as well as animals with many proofs of their virtue and efficacy in healing diseases, etc., was an Americanized English translation of a very old book of spells and home remedies. From the German tradition of Braucherei, it was translated as powwow, an appropriation in keeping with the many other violences European immigrants would commit against Algonquin and other indigenous peoples. In this book, the line between magic and folk wisdom is not a line, but a gauzy billowing. There are spells to make molasses and beer, recipes for eye water, words to protect a traveler on a journey, remedies for burn and colic. To prevent a wicked or malicious person from doing you an injury, you should recite the following. Dulix ix ux. Yea, you can't come over Pontio. Pontio is above Pilato. To cure epilepsy, take a turtle dove, cut its throat, and let the person afflicted with epilepsy drink the blood. For the spell to prevent gun barrels from rusting, you will need an ounce of bear's fat, half an ounce of badger's grease, half an ounce of snake's fat, 1 ounce of almond oil, and 1/4 of an ounce of pulverized indigo. To hear John Blymeyer tell it, the hex Nelson Raymeyer put on him had lasted his whole life from the moment he was born. To hear Nelson Raymeyer tell it, who is John Blymeyer, and why would I curse a man I don't know, or anybody at all? We used to live not so very far from the place where John Blymeyer murdered Nelson Raymeyer. A state away, but still inside the orbit of all those old hex signs on the barns and whispers of this or that granny woman and what folks remember of how she used to heal. Our defunct dairy farm straddled a stretch of Sunday Creek, and in that place, my husband and I liked to sit on the back porch making plans for the crumble down barn on our stretch of the banks. We thought it would be idyllically pastoral to hang one of those old charm signs over the hayloft. My favorite was the good luck distelfink, which is a stylized bird with a red feather coming out of the top of his eye that makes you think of quail. There is a curving fretwork of blue feathers down his neck like an echo of fish. The wings are a yellow plumage of jagged lightning folded close against the body. The distelfink often perches atop a tulip that means faith but opens out petals like a kiss. Like almost everyone else in those coal boom turned depopulated and opioid-addled towns known as little cities of the Black Diamond, we found it hard to justify the expense of barn paint when we were being so carefully, anxiously strategic about groceries and gas. The foundation was leaking and the furnace had a troublesome rattle that echoed through the silent winter. A local conservation group hired my husband for minimum wage to be an assistant to the water quality specialist because he knew something about wildlife biology and something about lab work, and because once in another watershed another lifetime ago, he lost the Ozark farm of his childhood to the lead mines that owned the underground rights beneath his family's farm and sunk the water table during a bad drought summer. There was a spring next to the foundation of his great-grandfather's cabin that burbled up a little creek where the cows drank. That summer, the water ran yellow, and then it didn't run at all. Sometimes our stretch of Sunday Creek ran gray and turbid like smoke, and we did not know why, despite repeated phone calls to Buckingham Coal, who still had to dig upstream. In Truetown, 9 miles downstream of us, the creek had long since turned orange and stank of rotten eggs because of a collapsed 19th century mine. Gob piles of coal too poor to burn lined the creek banks in a tarry mess of barren sludge, weeping acid for 100 years now. Old-timers say you can dunk your kid in the waters of that acid mine drainage, holding on tight to her ankles to cure her of lice. It's the kind of spell you can find in Long Lost Friend, besides suggestions for stinging nettles, which are good for banishing fears and fancies and to cause fish to collect. The book promises, whenever you hold this weed in your hand together with milfolia, you are safe from all fears and fancies that frequently deceive men. It goes on to say, more practically, if you mix it with a decoction of hemlock and rub your hands with it and put the rest in water that contains fish, you will find the fish to collect around your hands. I read this to my husband on a day when he came home sweaty and broke down tired after dragging a 150-pound generator through a mile of brush to send voltage through their nets to shock the fish. Momentarily stunned, the creatures bob to the surface, where the scientists record their paltry numbers and the distressing absence of certain key indicator species. Before long, they flicker back to life and disappear beneath the muck once more. If only he had known it could be so much easier, he says, stretching his sore arms out behind his back. Here is a remedy to be applied when anyone is sick. Let the sick person, without having converse with anyone, put water in a bottle before sunrise, close it up tight, and put it immediately in some box or chest. Lock it up and stop up the keyhole. The key must be carried in one of the pockets for 3 days, as nobody dare have it except the person who puts the bottle with water in the chest or the box. There are no instructions about what to do at the end of the 3 days. Drink the water, pour it down the drain, forget you ever put it in that box in the first place. I wonder how clear the water was running or how long it had been left in its dark box when John Blymeyer went to see Nellie Knoll, who everyone called the River Witch. According to the newspaper reports from that terrible summer in 1928, it was the River Witch who told him he needed a lock of Nelson Raymeyer's hair and a copy of his spell book to burn in order to lift the curse of his hard life. First, he scouted out the Raymeyer place by pretending he was a hungry hobo. Raymeyer gave him lodging that night and fed him breakfast in the morning. He poured him coffee and passed the syrup. Blymeyer came back the next night with 2 teenage accomplices, 14-year-old John Curry and 18-year-old Wilbur Hess. There is a remedy you can use when anyone is falling away, and which the book swears has cured many persons. Let the person, in perfect soberness and without having conversed with anyone, catch rain in his pot before sunrise, boil an egg in this, bore 3 small holes in this egg with a needle, and carry it to an ant hill made by big ants, and that person will feel relieved as soon as the egg is devoured. Where we lived, there was no talk of river witches or Nellie Knoll. There was only Mountain Mary and her legendary goodness. With her hands alone, the old-timer said she could heal you. But all you can find now of Mountain Mary is her name. It's on a forest here, a wet weather ditch there. There are the last few logs of this or that abandoned cabin in the way backwoods people say must have once been hers. Those who know well the spells and long lost friend say she would have saved you with these words from Ezekiel. And when I passed by thee and saw thee polluted in thine own blood, I said unto thee, when thou wast in thy blood, live. Yea, I said unto thee, when thou wast in thy blood, live. They say she was something powerful good in the midst of these terrible hard hills. They say she walks them sometimes still like a sweet wind, looking to brush past your hair and make you all right. There's a mist every morning that fills up the hollers so thick you can hardly see, and then there comes a moment each day when you crest a high ridge and see the sun all of a sudden fully risen. You can look down the valleys to the barns, some red, most gray with age and neglect, a few very fine ones decorated by a large painted quilt square or one of the many hex signs. A red horse in silhouette protects animals from disease and the barn from lightning. A maple leaf brings contentment. Oak leaves are for strength. Often the two symbols interweave in a sunburst of fortitude and happiness. Raindrops are a call down promise of fertility for the soil and the family. On other days, there is that other haze, the one still smoking out of the earth ever since 1884, when miners in New Straitsville had been striking hard against the poverty, the exploitation, and the dangerous working conditions. When the owners brought in scabs, the miners slipped into the coal seams and started a fire. By the time anyone who might have stopped it realized what was happening, the underground was blazing, and 100 years later, it's still burning, smoke still escaping through sinkholes to the surface every now and again. The mixture of defiance and righteous indignation, cutting against the unforeseen consequences of foolhardy violence, sometimes seems like the truest story this place knows how to tell about itself. That was an old mining disaster, but there keep on being new ones. Every time an oil dig collapses, a new fountain of sludgy poison springs out of the ground. The Upper Big Branch mine disaster was in 2010, and 29 people died digging coal out from beneath the West Virginia mountain. It still hangs heavy on the minds of these little cities. The spell to prevent conflagration is a long and complicated affair involving a black chicken, a scrap of a shirt worn by a chaste virgin and cut off according to her own terms, an egg laid on a Thursday, wax, pots, and various days of burying things beneath the threshold. Another method of stopping fire is to say these words. Our dear Sarah journeyed through the land, having a fiery hot brand in her hand. The fiery brand heats, the fiery brand sweats, fiery brand stop your beat, fiery brand stop your sweat. Long Lost Friend is the kind of book where beat is perhaps a typo and should read heat, or perhaps is exactly what the author intended. Among the dozen ways to stop bleeding, one is to say these words. I walk through a green forest. There I find 3 wells, cool and cold. The first is called courage, the second is called good, and the third is called stop the blood. I have gone and will go to many public hearings. I know the spell to gain a lawful suit. I know you take large leaves of sage and write the names of the 12 apostles on them, and then put these in your shoes before entering the courthouse. Nevertheless, our little town and all of our neighboring towns took donations of fresh coal ash the companies were otherwise required by law to dispose of as hazardous waste. To save money, they used the flakes instead of salt on the roads in the winter. So with spring thaws, new coal ash ran off the sides of roads directly into the creeks, and we didn't even have to wait for some new disaster to turn another spring orange. Nevertheless, treatment plans for the worst acid mine drainage sites were proposed. One city council voted the plan down because the acid neutralized the wastewater they dumped directly into the creek, as they had no sewage system. Another reason was that passive treatment ponds full of water reeds and other plants that would filter the toxins through their roots would not look as sightly as a mowed lawn. Hanging heavy in the air of so many meetings was the conviction you couldn't trust scientists, and you couldn't trust conservationists, and you couldn't trust people with nothing more to show for themselves than pride in all their degrees and accomplishments come to tell folks what to do. During these public hearings, mountaintops were removed. The earth began to shake as fracking destabilized the balance of bedrock and shale beneath our water table. We asked ourselves if orange water weren't the least of our worries, and we knew the answer was simply that we had too many worries. What happened to Nelson Rehmeyer is that no spell book could be found anywhere in his house or on his property. So the 2 men and the 14-year-old boy bludgeoned him, bound him to a chair, and set him on fire while he was still breathing. Despite being doused in kerosene, the body did not completely burn, which investigators said was one of the truly horrific things they'd ever seen. What happened to Nelson Rehmeyer is that he gave food and shelter to the people who would slaughter him, to people who did not know how to know a blessing when the plate was handed to them. What happened is this. When an old woman dies, she is dead, her cabin crumbles to the ground, and she's not around anymore to put her hand on your cheek and tell you it's going to be all right. When you light an old man on fire, whether he be some old witch or the spirit of a mountain or just a kind and generous bachelor, well, now he is dead too, and there's nothing that is going to change that. Long Lost Friend is a broken book. A support beam cracked, the roof collapsed, the water poured in or the fire did, the tailings and the ash everywhere. And now no one dares drink from the poison of those pages. It has spells to make divining rods, spells to lift a curse, spells for mending. I wish I believed it could do us any good. To mend broken glass. Take common cheese and wash it well, unslaked lime and the white of eggs. Rub all these well together until it becomes one mass and then use it. If it is made right, it will certainly hold. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Kathryn, on this public forum. Thank you for bringing us into, the difficult fruits that all of you are writing, and the way that you're moving between knowledge and the spells that you're making with your work, and the equal knowledge, as you just put it, that there are no instructions. So you're writing this into a time when we don't have rules by which to live, and to transition into talking, to having you talk to one another. I think that those instructions come to us through story. And so I want to tell our dear audience a brief story about these people as we launch into questions. So this is a story of CMarie, Kate, and Kathryn as social creatures. These stories are from personal experiences, and collectively they characterize these women as humans who are paying close attention to the world around them and offering kindnesses to their listener. The first is about CMarie. Once we sat in a restaurant together at opposite sides of a table. After socializing all day, I wasn't enjoying myself anymore. Recognizing my trapped deer demeanor, CMarie pointed down to her lap, indicating that I look down to mine, mouthing phone at me. She had sent me to mine a small gift, a picture of an Idaho river curling through the deeply ridged canyon, somewhere I could imagine myself in solitude, as she had been when she saw the real-life scene of water and evergreens. Another time, my friend Kate Lebo reached out with a zoomed-in image of a caterpillar eating the leaves of a plant in her backyard garden. Kate exclaiming in a delight she knew I would share, "Did you know the phase between developmental stages of metamorphosis is called instar, Maya? It's instar." And just yesterday, Kathryn Nuernberger, embarking on her daily field research on symbiotic mutualisms, called to tell me that a barnacle begins its life with 2 holes, one at each end of the body. However, after burrowing into the flesh of a whale, burying its head and emitting the matter that will calcify into its shell, the barnacle literally never looks back, and henceforth must do all eating, shitting, etc. out of its butt. These anecdotes about these women and writers tell us something about friendship and the practice of attention to the reader, which also directs itself to the writing process, curating content for a specific listener or listeners. My question is about this craft. How do you all decide what your reader needs to hear? What material you'll engage in the essay in that moment? And then with those in mind, how do you choose the essay form itself? How do you reach those listeners through that form?
Oh my God, who goes first? That was fantastic, Maya.
You do, Kate.
Okay. Well, I feel like through the course of writing this book, I started to get a much more solid sense of my writing practice as being trying to enter a room that is locked to me, but that once I can unlock it somehow and step inside, I'll be there alone. And from that space, it's not a lonely space, I can speak to one person or to some future self or to God or whatever. But just imagining being in this intimate place where no one is peeking over my shoulder to criticize, I suppose, just seemed absolutely essential to saying anything at all. So it didn't become about, how does the process help you decide what to write? It was, how does the process just allow you to write? And then whatever was allowed is what I ended up writing. And this felt particularly fraught as this is the first time I've really written a book within a pretty heavily social media-ized life, I guess. Social media has been around in my life for about 10 years, but for the 7 that I was writing this, it was getting more and more and more present. And there's I think a sense of the chorus of people you love, people you've never met in your life, people you would like to never speak to again, people you wish you knew, all talking at you all the time, all at once. And this kind of wonderful, horrible gift. So yeah, that room has been about how do I how do I get to some kind of silence so I can hear what the essay is?
Thanks. Do CMarie or Kathryn want to speak to that?
Sure. I love that that you said, Kate, how you would get to like how you create the room where it can happen. For me, most of my essays start on walks, usually when I'm out walking or hiking or backpacking, the times I don't have a laptop and just have a little shard of paper to write on. I find the way in, and that way in helps me to get to the rest of the story. In the case of Coyote Story, that wasn't it at all. The way in was finishing Woman Who Watches Over the World by Linda Hogan. And something within her writing and the repetition that she used allowed me to, it just opened that. It's like, that's where I need to go with it. That's how I need to let this essay take form, because I was haunted by that coyote for 20 years. So for 20 years, I sat on that story. And maybe I'm a slow metabolizer since we're talking about food, but I think it just had to find its way out. I had to find a way to release it. So coming at that story, and I think we're always looking for, like your mom, Kate, like we're always looking for that silver bullet that, oh, this is what you do. If you just like, you have this little gnome on your desk and you say the right things, then the essay comes, and it comes in the perfect form. But I think it's more like you said, where you find a place of silence and then it arises within you. And certainly once I started that, the form of Coyote Story had to be circular, and it had to be almost, thinking of your work, Kathryn, almost like a spell, consistently going back to certain words, because, it had so much of that Indigenous way of knowing, or TEK, within it, but it also had this other very straightforward linear story. So I wish there was just one way, but I would say that my room is often outside when I don't have disturbance from other things, that I do something and there's the doorway into the story.
Thanks so much.
For me, I had a teacher say once, and it was a criticism, but it's been a helpful criticism I think about all the time, which was that the problem with my poems, and it's true of my essays too, is that they're all like running on the engine of wonder. And the reason this was a problem is, or like in the drafts, was like there's no tension and wonder. It's kind of like, I think it's the reason that writing happy things is really challenging for like writers too, is like, if you feel happy, like why would you write if you felt happy? You would just be in it, I think. And in some ways, like that's always like, it begs the question when I'm feeling wonder, like I feel this compulsion, I want to write it down, I want to show somebody and be like, look, this is so amazing. And I guess maybe part of that's what separates happiness and wonder is like engines to drive a piece of writing, is like I want to share that, and that feeling of like, oh my gosh. But like, okay, but like it seems like everything is wonderful, really. Like I mean like in the right mood or from the right angle. Unless it's horrible or evil, like oil derricks I think are not especially wonderful, and acid mine drainage, but even acid mine drainage, they can like artists can like have converted that into paint, which is kind of wonderful. Okay, so like I think the question of the essay then is like, I've been stricken by wonder, but like I think that wonder is always sort of like it's figuring out what is the frame, like why did this thing in this moment in time strike me as so great that I just need to write about it. And usually the answer to that is that there's something else that it like feels like it's answered in my personal life, or like some like question that was needling at me that I didn't notice was needling at me. And so the writing the essay becomes this process of trying to figure out like what of that stuff that I was repressing, or that was like static in the background that was like bothering me, that like it needs to come into the essay, so that this thing that I am marveling at doesn't just read like a Wikipedia stub, but actually feels to readers like the answer that it was for me.
Thanks for that. That was really great. So I want to invite each of you to ask each other to jump in. If I ask a question and you want to direct it to another person, you're welcome to do that. So I'm jumping to a question further down my list because of all of your responses. I think thinking about the ways that we enter an essay in the creative nonfiction form, a lot of you are talking about the impetus to wonder and the rooms in which you write. And that leads me to a question about research methods and reshaping the knowledge that you receive when you do enter those spaces. You participate, each of you participate, whether furiously or with grave patience, walking or worrying two things against each other in unexpected processes. And that's what just came out in your answers. And this results in essays that also really push against and challenge the status quo of writing even today. And can you talk a little bit about your interruptions and field methods and the way that you see yourself working those binaries against each other? And you can talk about research methods or about the things that result and create frictions.
Okay, I have an idea of how to start with this question, which actually comes from my deep anxiety that I take with me to writing nonfiction, which comes out as a question that sounds like, but how do we know? How do we know? And it has to be said in that kind of plaintive, somewhat pathetic, but also like wonder craving way. I love, CMarie, what you were saying earlier about Indigenous way of knowing within your work. And one of the things that really attracts me to Coyote's story and to your work in general is the way that different ways of knowing rub up against each other. Same with Kate, the way that Kate is working I love what you were saying about wanting to make sure that your pieces didn't end up reading like a Wikipedia page. So that's also a question of how do we know? How does Wikipedia know? How does the writer on the page take, the information that's available at the click of a button and do something with it that makes it more than information? So throughout, I know for writing the book of Difficult Fruit, one of the things I was constantly conscious of was trying to reach for lots of different ways of knowing and trying to find a form that would contain all these different ways of knowing. So in Aronia, you can hear the Wikipedia impulse in my discussion of superfruits, for example. You can hear the investigating, well, how does my mother know how to make herself well? How do I know how to make myself well? How do I see around kind of the values, biases, and gifts that I've inherited about health and wellness? And then also, I've been interested in how magical thinking and metaphor guide us to the ways that we might be able to identify our medicines. That's another way to know. So I guess also trying to write all of this in a way so that these things they don't need to argue with each other. They don't need to, one doesn't need to win out over the other. They don't need to resolve into some, kind of smooth picture of knowledge. I think it's a lot more interesting to do, as I just heard again in Coyote's story and in Kate's essay, the way that through kind of the threading of lyric nonfiction, we can have these ways of knowing coexist. All right, back to you guys.
I was.
Oh, go ahead.
I was thinking about, so when I was researching witches was really interesting. I'm often interested in subjects that the knowledge that's available is somehow like kind of is incomplete or fragmented, because that of course feels like this really delicious invitation to imagine. And this is certainly the case with like reading like the history of witch trials, right? Like you have a person, the one I read here was sort of unusual in that it was pretty recent history. Mostly they're hundreds of years in the past. And so what you're left with is either like someone who basically the story of what their alleged witchcraft is like the stuff of folklore, or if there's trial records, the transcripts were like their confessions were torture induced, and often even those confessions are then like summarized by a court reporter after the fact to justify the verdict. So what if the woman is actually there is like, it's glimmering by and very open to interpretation. So as a writer, this becomes very like, it becomes interesting to try fun. I mean, sad, but like there's this way of trying to imagine into a person's life that can feel really like, it feels cool, like to do that imagining. The risk is like, that was a real person that really suffered in this way. And I struggled a lot with like not wanting to over imagine. Like I didn't want to just like replace whoever that person actually was with just like who I am or who I like maybe want them to be for my own purposes. So I was often trying in the essays to hold enough space and like to like entertain as many of the possibilities for who they were, to try to like allow for the possibility that whoever that person really was could glimmer through. But often like the trap felt like, the trap felt like I could over research too, where I could find out everything the historians have said about the historical context and then become very bogged down and like take a side in this interpretation, that interpretation. And if I ever found myself like ending up with an arguable thesis, I knew I was just screwed and it was time to start over. And so I started to figure out at some point in the process was like what I knew an essay was done, or I knew the research, I'd reached a sufficient amount of research when I like had found a way to end with a question was what I was looking for. So I didn't want the essays to be answers, but if I had found a good question that I could resolve everything with, that was maybe a sign that the research had worked in some kind of way.
Thanks, Kate.
I write mostly kind of the memoir form, and it might be partially because I'm lazy and don't want to have to do some of the research that comes with more difficult or trying essays. But in Lake 8, which you referred to earlier, Kathryn, I had a lot of references to what fish were in the lake and what happened to them, and the rosy finch that returned, and a lot of that. When I did my first draft, I just wrote what I remembered, and then my partner, being a fish biologist, would reread it and go, no. And I'd make some comment like the lake was 500 feet deep and 30 acres wide. And he's like, no, it's more like 50. So he's really good at those kind of fact checking. He's also super resourceful about getting me the information so that I see all the way around something, which is really helpful when I'm working with plants or animals or those kind of details. Where that doesn't come in is when I'm playing with my own memory. And I think that I could write a certain essay every year of my life and it's going to be different because I'm a different person each time that I write it. But I also believe, and I like to tell this to my students, that your stories are your own, and you can't have someone check that against you or gaslight you or say you don't remember it that way. That's not what really happened. Those stories within you and how it happened to you belong to you, and those you have a right to. And I recently published a piece about an old farmhouse that my partner and I skied to, and we cross country skied to it, and the window had busted out, and I skied down into the living room, and this house reminded me of my father's house, and was like, it was white, like the landscape. And I had all these details in it, and I get it published. And Caleb was like, the house was red. I'm like, no, it was white. It was, and I'm describing it. And then, so here we are a couple of years later, we put on our skis and we go out there. The house is so red. It's so red. But I think that's also an interesting story that's going to make its own story at some point, that sometimes what we remember is what we need to remember for that story. And I don't know that we should disallow that. I think that those memories can be facts within themselves, going back to what Kate says, like, how do you know what is and isn't? So I think that writing for me with memoir, being the most honest I can be with what I know, and then making sure I don't do injustice to what really is, whether it's the common name or how they reproduce or the right tree, is something that I can fix afterwards. But I hold on to those memories because sometimes those memories, the way I disremember them, are a story in themselves.
Thank you, CMarie. Sometimes what we remember for the story is what we need to remember for that story, right? Thank you for that. That's a great place to close us out. And thank you to all of our readers, CMarie, Kate, and Kathryn. And thank you again to Get Lit for hosting Difficult Fruits, a Reading and Conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you to all of our readers. And yeah, thank you, Maya, for hosting. That was such a thoughtful, so introduction, and all of your questions were wonderful. It was so great to see all the connections with everybody's work and their process and their inspiration. It was really beautiful. So thank you again. And to our audience at home, don't forget, you can learn more about all of these writers on our website, getlitfestival.org. You can also purchase their books through our festival bookseller, Aunties, using the link on our website. And while you're there, please make sure to check out the festival schedule for more fantastic and free festival events. And consider donating to help us put on next year's in-person festival in April. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you at the next event. Bye, everybody.